My name's Roger Kershaw, and I'm going to be talking to you today about using migration records. Now, migration records is a really big subject to do in 30 minutes, so I'm going to restrict it mainly to the 19th and 20th century sources, and mainly to sources held by the National Archives at Kew. For emigration, the golden age of emigration, mainly to the New World, was between 1815 and 1914. So between the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the start of the First World War. Thereafter, emigration restrictions were put in place as passports became commonplace and countries went through the Great Depression of the 1920s. For immigration, one of the biggest waves was after the Second World War, when workers from the Commonwealth helped Britain rebuild after the Second World War. For this talk, I'm also only going to focus on free emigration sources, so I'll not include reference to enforced migration sources such as transportation records to Australia, deportation, and child migration. So in terms of structuring the talk, migration is often for push and pull reasons, and we'll explore some of these later on. People are pushed out because of economic deprivation or religious intolerance, and they are pulled in because there is an economic need for labour and skilled workers. So we'll look at some sources relating to the physical arrival and departure of people through records of settlement and also records of internment, as all enemy aliens were assessed for internment or imprisonment during both World Wars, and we have a significant collection for Second World War records. When discussing migration records, it's really important to appreciate the language used at the time. The term alien may seem very archaic and odd in 21st century usage, but it was a term in commonplace in the 20th century, so much so that an alien's office was in operation by the UK government up until 1971. These online research guides on our website provide links to records in our online catalogue Discovery. We have research guides for emigrants, passports, ships passenger lists, and research in British colonies and dominions to where many emigrants went. And it is worth looking at these as a starting point to any research you decide to do. Similarly, we have research guides on immigrants, internees, and British citizenship records. And if you want something more in-depth, I've written a number of books on the subject of migration, the most recent being one called Migration Records. Many people are surprised to learn that passports were not made compulsory for people arriving or leaving from British ports until 1915. Introduced as a wartime measure, it was hoped that they would help prevent any enemy aliens from entering the country. Passport records were created by the Foreign Office, and the archives spanned the period 1795 through to 1948, with some gaps in the nominal indexes. We also have a very small sample of passports issued and subsequently expired or cancelled, together with a small sample of applications for passports. Here's an example from the series FO610. So these records are passport registers. Registers survive for the period 1795 to 1948, but as I said before, there are only name indexes to get you into them in FO611 for the periods 1851 to 1862 and 1874 to 1916. So there are gaps for the period 1863 to 1873 and 1917 right through to 1948. As such, without these nominal indexes, you'll need to have a rough idea when somebody applied to travel. The 10-year passport didn't come into force until 1968, and prior to that, passports were issued for much shorter periods, and initially for single periods of travel overseas only. So people may appear many times in these records. So in terms of the information they provide, they're not great from a family history point of view. You'll get the date where the passport was issued, the number of the passport, the name of the individual, the destination, which quite often just said Europe or a continent, but some of the early ones are quite specific to a city, such as this one for Rome. And then there's a column up for who recommended the applications. It's much similar to the column to the application we get today when you have to have your photograph verified from somebody And then finally, there's an indication of how much the passport cost. So in these days, in 1876, the cost was 2 shillings. And here's a later example from 1930. So this relates to people again travelling. The price has gone up. It seems to be 7 shillings and 6pence. If anything, the information is more scanned. There's no longer a recommendation column, and the destination seems to mainly be by continent. So all of these people on the image are going or travelling to Europe. So these records have all been scanned and digitized, and they can be searched on Find My Past. What can be searched are the indexes to the registers. So the records that can be searched are in F0611. The original registers are still available in original format at the archives at Kew. But do be mindful that the index is not comprehensive and doesn't cover all the years where the registers survive. So this is an example of a passport in the series F0655, which consists of the passport itself and application attached to it. Now, this particular document relates to the future Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who applied for a passport on the 16th of June 1915 when he was Minister of Munitions of War. There are over 2,200 records in this range, dating from 1802 right through to 1961. So it's a very small sample, but the bulk are from the 20th century and all can be searched by name on our catalogue discovery. A similar series is F0737. This series consists of over 600 documents relating to individuals who applied for passports to travel from 1916 right through to 1983. Again, they're fascinating with the early inclusion of photographs, which became compulsory in 1916. And like F0655, all can be searched by name of applicant on our catalogue discovery. Passengers are of course recorded on passenger lists and certificates of arrival. Certificates of arrival were created by the Aliens Office, which was part of the Home Office, and passenger lists were created by the Board of Trade up to 1960. This is an image from the series H02, and it's an example of a certificate of arrival. The coverage for these records is 1836 to 1852 only, and name indexes in H05 survive for an earlier period from 1826 and through to 1849. The information in front of you now is the case of the German philosopher and businessman Friedrich Engels. Now, not all people were issued with certificates of arrival. Exceptions were merchant seamen, ambassadors, and their domestic servants, and children under the age of 14. Felix Mendelssohn Chopin, described as a musical editor. Francis Liszt. There are some 650,000 names in total, but not all were emigrants. Many were merchants and traders, or simply visiting. The majority came from France and Germany states, though significant numbers came from the Italian states, Belgium, Holland, Switzerland, Spain, and Austria. There are indeed gaps throughout the certificates in H02 and the lists in H03, and this was simply because aliens went through ports of arrival unchecked, especially during times of peace. In a select committee on laws affecting aliens in 1843, it was reported that in 1842 no lists were provided by masters, and there were no registrations. In London, although an estimated 7,700 landed, only 4,500 were issued with certificates of arrival. This was one reason why lists and certificates after the 1850s and 1860s were not preserved as archives. All of these records are available to search on our partner site, ancestry.co.uk. Before we move on to passenger lists, the Board of Trade maintained a separate series of passengers who were born or who married or who died on their journeys. The series is BT334, and this image is a register of deceased passengers on the Titanic disaster in 1912. The series BT 158, 159 and 160 and BT 334 are now online for the period 1854 to 1972 at bmdregistered.co.uk in partnership with the National Archives. You can also find information on Find My Past. For the 1850s to the 1870s, the registers are quite full, as most passengers travelled in steerage. The accommodation was frequently overcrowded, and with poor ventilation and long journeys, diseases such as cholera and typhus reached epidemic proportions. Many emigrants died as a result, particularly prior to the 1870s, by which time virtually all emigrants to North America and Australia travelled by steamship, which helped cut journey times considerably. Plus, health and safety improved markedly with the introduction of the mandatory ship's surgeons. Outgoing passenger lists are in BT 27, recording some 30 million names of people travelling on ships from UK ports to ports beyond Europe and the Mediterranean Sea between 1890 and 1960. Information varies, and it's likely to be less than personal information on corresponding immigration records, so always check these records at the relevant National Archive. Aside from name of individual or ship, the port of departure and date of departure, as well as passenger names, you should get ages, and occupations begin to appear from about 1910, and then from about 1930, the last known address in the UK is also recorded. So this is an outgoing passenger list from Southampton from July 1921, and this record includes the emigration of one Archibald Leach, who became Cary Grant, the film actor, and this is a snapshot of his emigration to America 100 years ago in July this year, so July 1920. And here we have an image from an incoming passenger list in the series of records BT 26. This is an extract from the Empire Windrush passenger list, which docked at Tilbury Harbour in London in June 1948, with over 1,000 passengers, many of them Commonwealth migrants from the Caribbean, including Samuel King, who would become the first black mayor of the London Borough of Southwark in the 1980s. Again, an address field is included, and this is the intended place of abode in the UK. Now, the lists stop in September 1960, and for 3 months until December 1960, the passenger lists are replaced by sea arrival cards with very similar information. The National Archives hold no arrival records after December 1960, and arrivals by air were never selected for permanent preservation. Incoming outgoing passenger lists can be searched by name of passenger on our partner sites Find My Past and Ancestry.co.uk. So let's move on to settlement records. The Land and Emigration Commission was established in 1833 to promote and foster emigration from the UK to the colonies by providing free passage and land grants, and similar incentives were offered by poor law unions in the UK to migrate out of parishes those requiring poor law relief. The Land and Emigration Commission record in CO 386 are a fascinating personal picture of mid-19th century emigrants, with letters written to families and friends promoting decisions to emigrate, such as this one, which is from a Carol Sullivan, who has migrated to Canada in 1824. He writes to his friends in Ireland, expressing his great satisfaction at his situation and how happy it has been for him to have come to Canada. The Commission hoped that such letters would encourage others to apply to the board. Here is an application for a free passage to Canada from a family of 10. Applications and decisions were based on the pull and push reasons discussed earlier. Canada needed labour to work and develop the land and to create an economy for the emerging and growing populations and settlements. Rural Britain was suffering rural depression as the Industrial Revolution introduced mechanisation, which increased unemployment. And here's another application from Fareham in Hampshire. Records for the Land and Emigration Commission survive for the period 1833 to 1894, but they are not searchable by name on our catalogue. They're only searchable by year and destination. In total, there are probably several hundred letters, so not a great sample of the hundreds of thousands that would benefit from the commission. And here's a record from the Poor Law Records in Norfolk relating to the emigration of a family to Upper Canada in 1836. Again, there's no name comprehensive, or there's no comprehensive name index on our catalogue, so it's a case of ploughing through the records by year and by month. Moving on now to registration and internment of aliens. What we're going to discuss here are registration cards, and the National Archives hold the records of the Metropolitan Police, so the London Police, or the counties of London and Middlesex. But we're also going to discuss the internment of enemy aliens during the Second World War, and then we'll look at some of the personal files which help expand beyond the records I've discussed just then. So here is an example of an alien registration card in the series MEPO 35. The wartime measure in 1914 required all aliens to register at police offices up and down the country, and this was the resulting record kept by the police. People would only come off the aliens register if they died, left the UK, or became British upon marriage or naturalisation. So in this case, Maria Bader came off the register in 1920 when she married Arthur Joseph Chalk, who was a British subject. She took her husband's nationality upon marriage and would have to reapply to become British, even if he predeceased her. So as you can see, the information is quite rich. You have information about where she was born, her date of birth, her occupation, and also a photograph. This is an example of the Alien Identity Book for Marie Bader. It's very unusual for us to have copies of alien identity books, as these would be issued with the aliens to carry around with them. However, we do have some sample ones, and this is one of those on the screen. So the main collection we have are the actual registration cards that were created and maintained and preserved at police offices up and down the country. Men tend to have blue cards, and women tended to have yellow cards. Here are the cards for the bookmaker Joseph Correll. Now these cards survive by accident. All were scheduled for destruction, but about 1,000 cases were found in the Home Office buildings around about 1990. And a decision was made to preserve this very small sample of the hundreds and thousands of aliens resident in London in the 20th century. Cards for other counties or police constabularies will survive in local archives or in police museums. Some people had 3 or 4 cards because they'd be on the register for a number of decades, such as Joe Correll. So you can see the aging process before you. Joe Correll finally naturalised in the 1950s, so he'd be over 50 in the last picture you can see on the card. On the reverse of the card and subsequent cards, you can see information about their occupations, their marriages, and their changes of addresses, but also the recording of fines if these changes in the information weren't declared. Correll married a British subject, so she, a Dorothy Helen Praker, would take his nationality until he naturalised, so she would have her own alien cards too, even though she was a British subject. Discovery and much of the collection can be downloaded through our website, and you can access these records by name, but as I say, They only relate to about 1,000 to 1,200 individuals. And these records, as I say, can be downloaded through our website only as part of our digital downloads. So let's move on to internment records. So this is an enemy alien internment tribunal card for an Arthur Weidenfeld. Now he would go on to form the publishing company Weidenfeld and Nicholson. But in 1939, at the age of 20, he was one of some 66,000 enemy aliens who had been classified as Category C. Now, 90% of all of those who sat before internment tribunal boards came out as Category C, which meant that they were at liberty to work in the UK. So a decision was not taken to intern them or imprison them. And this was the case for Arthur Weidenfeld. So the card is quite interesting in the sense that it provides quite a lot of information about the individual, their date and place of birth, their nationality. It also provides a police registration certificate, so you could then match up this card perhaps with an alien registration card that we just discussed. And there's also sometimes a Home Office reference, which will take us to some of the personal files that we have in the National Archives. In this particular case, there's no Home Office reference for Arthur Weidenfeld. So Weidenfeld represented some 55,000 Jewish refugees who had come to the UK to escape Nazi persecution in the early to the mid-1930s, and he found himself in Category C. Now we can't really take this one any further because the police registration related to alien registration cards. So if they survive, they are going to be held in cards in and around Evesham, which is in Herefordshire, I think. But on the back of the card, if a decision was made for an exemption from internment, there's sometimes a clue. And on the back of this card, it very clearly says that Weidenfeld is employed by the BBC as an announcer, foreign programmes, and is a Jewish refugee doing very useful work. So as I say, if you wanted to check to see whether there were any registration cards for Weidenfeld, you'd need to look at the Hereford and Worcestershire Record Office. But the cards are fascinating. Here we've got another one for a 16-year-old who had escaped persecution from Vienna with his parents and was settling in school in Falmouth. Internee records for the Second World War can be searched by name on our partner site, Find Past. Although many enemy aliens were initially not interned at the start of the Second World War, in June 1940, when Italy joined Nazi Germany in the war and invasion fears were heightened, tens of thousands of enemy aliens, mainly Jewish refugees, were rounded up and placed in camps. And many would subsequently be shipped overseas, destined for internment camps in Canada and Australia. The largest concentration of camps in the UK was in the Isle of Man, and we have some camp records in addition to the internee cards, but most of these are available to view at Kew in their original format. Internee records can lead to a fascinating series of alien personal files in the series H0405. The 60,000 files in this series relate to individual foreign citizens, mainly European, who arrived in the UK between 1934 and 1948 and who at some point applied to be British through naturalisation. All files include an application for naturalisation with police reports, and some also include an initial application for a visa or employment permit, change of name or business name, and many will include Second World War internment papers, such as this one on the screen. Now this record relates to the restaurateur Frank Burney, and the record dates from 1928 to 1941. Now Frank Burney was not a foreign national at the outbreak of war in 1939, so he wasn't an enemy alien, having taken out British citizenship some years earlier in 1934. However, by May 1940, with the risk of German invasion high, regardless of their category classification, a further 8,000 Germans and Austrians resident in the southern strip of England found themselves interned. Resident Italians were also considered for internment following Italy's declaration of war on Britain on the 10th of June 1940. Some 4,000 resident Italians who were known to be members of the Italian Fascist Party and others aged between 16 and 70 who had lived in the UK for less than 20 years were ordered to be interned. So it's worth looking at Frank Burney's record in some detail. There is no tribunal card for Frank Burney as he was not an alien, having become a naturalised subject in 1934. However, he was arrested under the Defence Act on the 10th of June 1940 for being a person of hostile associations and detained in Liverpool and later spending some time at the internment camp in Huyton. So on the 10th of December 1940, he appeared before the advisory committee to consider appeals against orders of internment, and this record provides a detailed transcript. He had earlier been arrested as he was a member of the Italian Fascist Party and had been so since 1923. He became a member because some of his friends had done so and because it enabled him to attend annual dances at the Park Hotel and the Royal Hotel in Cardiff. He claimed he had never attended meetings of the Fascio and did not know where their headquarters were in Cardiff. He also said that he never wore the fascist badge in this country, but he did when he returned to Italy in the 1920s and the 1930s. In a visit to Italy in 1933, he was appalled at the brutal methods employed by the fascists and on his return applied successfully for naturalisation, and he was granted a British passport in 1935. He denied ever being a member of the committee of the Cardiff Fascio. He had endeavoured at the beginning of the war to join the Special Constabulary and later to join the ARP service in Cardiff. He also had no objection to fighting against all the king's enemies, including the Italians. So the file, very detailed, includes letters in support of his appeal, such as this one. And also this one from the Justices of the Peace. Burney's case was heard on the 10th of December 1940, 6 months after his arrest. The committee considered that Burney was rooted to this country, that any sympathy he had for Italy had for some time been moribund, and that his connection with the Fascist Party was little more than superficial. The committee recommended his release from detention. Burney went on with his brother Aldo to establish the first Burney Inn steakhouse in 1955, remaining in England until his death in 2000 at the age of 96. All records in HO 405 can be searched by surname and forename initials on discovery, but none have been digitised. Those that are closed can be requested to be opened under the Freedom of Information Act 2000 on our catalogue. So now we finish the talk with discussion of records relating to citizenship. So naturalisation and registration of British nationality. Both naturalisation and registration records were created by the Home Office, and there are various series to search, but all are searchable by name of applicant on our catalogue discovery. For naturalisations, there are two types of record: a duplicate copy of the certificate of naturalisation and the more detailed background papers pertaining to the application itself. We believe that there are well over 300,000 naturalisation records for the period 1844 to 1982. Here is the case of Michael Marks's application in 1897. In order to become British, you had to list all residential properties in the past 5 years and have details confirmed by referees. Here is the resident referee declaration signed by Michael Marks's British business partner, Thomas Spencer. The two formed the retail company, Marks and Spencer. From 1872, a police report was introduced to check and verify information submitted by the applicant and their referees. Here is the report from the Mayor of Wigan's office pertaining to Michael Marks's application, which proved successful. Unfortunately for another Marx, the philosopher Karl Marx, the police report condemned his application in 1874 and he never became British. The report from the Metropolitan Police reads, "He is the notorious German agitator, the head of the International Society and an advocate of communistic principles. This man has not been loyal to his own king and country." Here are two later successful applications and examples of Home Office copies of certificates of naturalisation in the series HO334. The one on the left relates to Austrian Jewish architect Ernst Freud, son of Sigmund Freud, who moved to the UK with his young family in 1933 as the threat of Nazi persecution increased. After 5 years' residence, he was eligible to apply for naturalisation, and he did so successfully, and this extended to his children, Stephen, Lucian and Clement. The second example relates to Philip Mountbatten, a Greek national who became British in 1947 prior to marrying the then Princess Elizabeth. Naturalisation records can be searched by name and downloaded on our partner site ancestry.co.uk, but for data protection reasons only those certificates issued between 1870 and 1916 have so far been added to the site. Here is a registration of British nationality. On the 1st of January 1949, under the British Nationality Act, some 600 million people in the Commonwealth became British citizens, but they needed to register their nationality in order to apply for a British passport, and the National Archives hold over 1 million registrations made in the UK between 1949 and 1980s. This one relates to Samuel King. Earlier we looked at his arrival record on board the Empire Windrush in June 1948. This is his register of British nationality, recording his UK address and details of his parentage. The reverse of the record records his service in the RAF during wartime. We estimate we have over 1 million of these registrations. For data protection reasons, only those who were born before or more than 100 years ago can be searched by name on our catalogue, but we will, on request, search for records of those born less than 100 years ago through our website. If we find a record and match the details you provide, we'll include a link to a copying form, as none of this collection has been digitized. Thanks for listening. Any questions?